Hey robot fans, welcome back to the build. Today, we get dirty. The weathering process for me is broken up into two stages, the first of which is the wash stage. We're going to be doing a lot of paint washes with this Liquitex black acrylic paint. This is the same paint I use to do all the black on the helmet. We're going to be using a solo cup. Any red party college solo cup will do, or if you have a daughter who likes pretty princess parties, a purple one will work as well. A lot of paintbrushes. I have big, medium, and small paintbrushes with hard bristles, soft bristles, and medium bristles. I'm not sure which one I'm going to be using the most, but I have a whole bunch here. Paper towels. You're going to need dry paper towels and wet paper towels. Some that'll get dirty, some that'll stay relatively clean. And lastly, I have a turntable here to put the helmet on. You can buy these at most grocery stores, at least in the US. These are like Spice Rack Lazy Susans. They're pretty cheap, and they work great for giving you some movement around the helmet. My start condition for the paint goes like this. I add just a little bit of black paint to the bottom, maybe just a drop or two. I don't want this hanging off. There we go. And then I add a good amount of water. You really want to dilute it quite a bit. Now this paint we're going to mix together. So we're going to get like a nice dirty water, but it's very loose, very, very runny. And then on top of all of this, we're going to put a really big fat glob of paint inside that we're not going to mix together. So this way, there's a pretty good glob of paint at the bottom of the water, which we could dip into further and further depending on how thick we want our application to be. The wash layer is pretty simple. What you're going to do is apply very, very watery paint over the entire helmet and just keep wiping it away. Washing it with paint and wiping it away. And what this is going to do is kind of add a little tinge to the helmet, and what you want to do is wipe away from the center out, leaving more of the material on the edges of the helmet as opposed to the center. And this is going to create a sort of a vignette effect. If we pause the video here, I could show you the effect that we're going for. If I trace the outline of the helmet and then apply a blur filter, you could see that we create this vignette effect where it's darkest near the edges and gets lighter and lighter as you move away from that edge. This is what we're going for with this part of the weathering. After your first few wash layers going over the entire helmet, you can really accentuate the vignette effect by just focusing your washes towards the edges. That being said, you don't really want to rush this. You want to build up many, many subtle layers. That's what gives a realistic weathering effect. When you feel like you've done enough wash layers, you could start doing a dry brush technique. This is a little different in that the brush will be mostly dry and you'll just be dabbing paint along the edges and then still wiping it off in the same manner. This will leave a lot more paint in its path, so you want to be a little bit careful and be really subtle with this. You don't want to do too much too fast. Obviously, you're going to want to do this around your entire helmet. I'm just showing you this one section so we can get through all the techniques. If we pause the video here, I could show you the next stage of weathering that I did. What I really wanted to do is accentuate the edge, so if we trace out the contour again and use a lot less of a blur, you can see you can really get a fine contour line. To get this, I used an airbrush. I bought an airbrush kit off Amazon. I think for the compressor, paint, and the brushes, it all came to like 50 bucks. Definitely well worth the purchase. And honestly, no secret here, I just did a light touch all around all of the edges of the helmet, and this really brought out all of the weathering that I had already done. I also did the final install of the greeblies, so they can get their proper weathering as well. I'm presenting this to you in a very linear way, but I did a lot of back and forth between the washes and the dry brushing and the airbrushing, and then going back to washing and just taking on big chunks at a time and then going back and doing very localized weathering bits just for different parts that I didn't like the way they looked. I would do multiple washes or multiple sessions with the airbrush. There's really no rhyme or reason to the order that I did things. In the end, I probably did 5 rounds of each technique over various different spots of the helmet to get the look that I wanted. Next up is the rust coloration around the ears. To do this, I'm going to be using Americana brand acrylic paints. I have traditional raw sienna and traditional burnt sienna. I'm attacking this the same way I did the rest of the helmet with the black. I'm just going to do some light washes with both of these rust colors and then move straight into dry brushing. The rust effect is going to be mostly dry brushed on because that gives you a nice texture as well as mixing the colors nicely. I really like the way it looks. The only question I have is how far do I want to go with the rusting of the ear? I decide just to kind of go for it and do whatever I feel like. I can always knock it back later. So I go pretty heavy on the ear portion and move all the way down through the cheek, just adding rust here and there. I did some light airbrushing over the rust paint just to give it some light spots, some dark spots, and some dirt so it matches the rest of the helmet. I had been weathering the macro binoculars in parallel to the helmet, so I added those in and continued the rust up the stems of the macro binoculars. At this point, the rust is getting pretty thick. I think I went a little further than I want for the end result. I like the overall look and the overall color. I just think the volume of color is a little bit more than I think I want. So I got a great recommendation to use some high grit sandpaper. I actually used 400 just to kind of knock back the color. It reduced the saturation quite a bit. It blended the colors a little bit, and it also gave a nice chipping effect that looks pretty realistic. Next, I used a very soft bristle brush to make some drips of the rust color. This will give it an overall rustier look without necessarily having the heavy texture of the dry brush. I spent a good bit of time doing some detailing work after the main sections were done. I filled in a lot of the battle damage with extra dirt. I airbrushed sections of the back that I thought needed more detail. There were a lot of little areas that bothered me that I spent a lot of time on. I just wanted it to be perfect before I can say I was done. With all my painting done, I can apply my clear coat. For this, I am using Krylon Matte Finish Spray. I do 2 coats of this on the helmet and the binoculars. With the clear coat done, we can add the final 2 pieces of the helmet, which are the teeth mesh and the visor. I decided to 3D print my teeth mesh. I could have probably bought something from Amazon, but I like the idea of putting as much custom 3D printed stuff on here as I can. These were a breeze to print out, and I cut them into smaller pieces that will fit the teeth. I did a round of Bob Smith Industries CLA glue to glue them into place, and then I took a hot glue gun and just kind of patted the edges a little bit so I wouldn't be brushing up against a sharp edge of plastic. Next up is the visor. I used a welder's replacement mask. I cut it to shape and then hot glued it into place. I reinstalled the macro binoculars, added back on the greeblies, and we are done. Yes, I did another DIY photo shoot just like in the last video. You can see all of these photos on my Instagram account, which is a great place to see what happens in between the videos as well. Alright, that's it for this video. Thanks for tuning in. Next time will be the final helmet video. We're going to install the electronics into the head. This muffled voice will be amplified for the entire Republic. We're going to put some fans in, some lights, and an internal padding system so this thing fits a little bit better. So stay tuned for that. As always, we're going to finish with a little progression shot, so I'll see you next time.